We continue our conversation now about the dominant story of the week. It should be everywhere, of course. Joe Biden's classified document scandal, the complete and total mishandling of state secrets under his watch. They're finding them everywhere, and now there's a special counsel investigating it. Kash Patel is our guest, former federal prosecutor and also author of the children's book The Plot Against the King, 2000 Mules. I think with this one, you might have to have a third sequel now to The Plot Against the King so kids can keep up, Kash.
We're going to call it The Return of the MAGA King.
There it is. Excellent. Well, listen, let's talk about the MAGA King for a moment, because if you look at the New York Times, the Washington Post, cable news, broadcast news, they cannot tell this story about Joe Biden's mishandling of state secrets, classified documents, without shooting it through the prism of Donald Trump and the Mar-a-Lago raid. What's the difference here between these two stories, Kash?
You know, Larry, I say let them keep putting out their attempted facade of distinction. Their facade of distinction, every time they say something, goes to exonerate President Trump's case. And what do I mean? Well, the law has now been the law is crystal clear. It's finally now come to the headlines. There is one person on planet Earth is the Universal Classification Authority for the United States of America. That's a sitting president. That's it. That means he can classify and declassify any documents while he is a sitting president of the United States. You know who cannot do that? A vice president. That means, by default, the comparison between Vice President Joe Biden taking classified documents and President Trump, if he were to have taken classified documents, is completely an inappropriate analogy, because the law is not vested in the Vice President of the United States to take those documents. And even if it were, what is he doing taking them for 6 and 7 years, and who else handled them is a completely separate matter as when you compare it to Trump.
And the fact, listen, it's going to be pretty hard for him to claim, oh, yeah, I declassified those, when he's already on record saying, I had no idea they were there. So, I mean, he didn't declassify something he didn't know existed, right? But if you could just clear this up for us, because viewers of this program will know that earlier in the week, I think it was John Solomon, who was sort of in the loop on President Trump's archived documents and the negotiations with the archive over his documents. He told our viewers that during the Bush-Cheney era, the ability and legal ability to declassify documents was extended to the vice president, and that has maintained. Is that not so?
So under the Office of Director of National Intelligence that was created after 9/11, the vested authority of the presidency in terms of classification goes to him. And he is permitted to delegate some of that authority down to his cabinet secretaries and the vice president. But this is a great point that no one's talking about. So it did happen in the Bush-Cheney administration. Bush delegated it down to Cheney. I mean, that caused a whole host of problems for another day we'll talk about. But here, what is Barack Obama going to come out and say? Yeah, I gave Joe all the declassification authority he wanted. Now that we know, since he told the world, Joe Biden, I had nothing to do with it. Well, you can't have it both ways. Either Barack Obama told you and is going to come out to the world and say, hey, Joe had all the declassification authority, or I had nothing to do with it, so it didn't matter what classification authority you had.
I see. So they can, like you said, they can't have it, but it's one or the other, but it cannot be both, not logically. All right. So if we could talk a little bit more about the Trump situation, because of course, President Trump has said that any documents that he may or may not have had down in Mar-a-Lago, he had declassified. What does that procedure look like exactly? And again, because I'm trying to draw distinctions between what he had and what Vice President Biden had.
Yeah, just speaking objectively, any sitting president, and it's the only way this applies, can declassify any document or any piece of intelligence, audio tape, videotape, in any fashion he wants. There doesn't have to be a formal process like the lower levels of government for declassification. That rule just doesn't apply to the sitting president. I'll give you a perfect example. When we did the bin Laden raid, where we took out Osama bin Laden, President Obama, rightfully so, walked to the podium at the White House that night and informed the public in detail about that operation, which included, up to that point, classified information. But he, as a sitting president of the United States, said, this is no longer declassified before he went out there. That's it. That's all it takes. And so if the law applied to President Obama then, that same law must apply to President Trump.
Great example. I'm also hearing from the media, Kash Patel, that the big difference here is that Biden immediately cooperated fully with the National Archives and the Justice Department. Correct me if I'm wrong. I followed the story of the Mar-a-Lago documents pretty closely. It seems that there was an ongoing dialogue going on with Trump's people, Trump's attorneys, and the National Archives and the FBI. In fact, didn't the FBI or the Justice Department recommend an additional lock on a door where these
Yeah.
things were being kept? It was totally transparent, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's totally it's the forgiveness before the fall sort of innocence explanation they're going for. Oh, we're an open book. We, the Biden presidency, we know the media will say President Trump wasn't cooperative. But listen, here's the thing: if Joe Biden, is really being cooperative, okay, then when are you going to go appear in the grand jury? And when are you, the Justice Department and FBI, run by Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray, going to issue subpoenas for all of his personal staff, for all of his campaign lawyers, for all of his White House counsel staff who are saying publicly what these documents are and how they got there? This is information that a criminal investigation, which can only occur if a special counsel is appointed. So we know there's a criminal investigation ongoing. Why haven't the subpoenas been out since we knew? Well, we now know that DOJ figured this out back in November, and I think before then. So months and months and months, and we have what, 250 subpoenas in the Trump case and zero in the Joe Biden case? Talk about two disparate systems of
Right.
justice, which the American people are sick and tired of. And the only accountability, Larry, is going to come from this new committee in Congress. And I'm calling for the first subpoenaed witness by Jim Jordan to be the special counsel Robert Hur, and his documents at DOJ, his emails that show his corrupt actions, and how he and Rod Rosenstein signed off on the subpoena to investigate me in 2017 when I was the lead investigator for Devin Nunes. That's who this guy is, and the receipts
That's
will show it out.
I remember that. And also, and then they were using that threat of investigating you again as a weapon to try to call off any oversight. I mean, this is the really insidious thing that's going on between the executive branch and Congress when they've got this hostile stance, right? I mean, this is why people are calling for FBI reform, Cash.
This is it. And then you have Rod Rosenstein, the attorney general, had the audacity to go to Congress in 2018 and lie under oath about the very threat. He knew it wasn't just a threat. It was an actual investigation into the people exposing his and Robert Hur's corruption. So this is why you're right, why there's no faith in the Justice Department. And under Chris Wray's leadership, we can go on for hours about the corruption there. But all
Yeah.
he cares about is protecting the ego and legacy of his name at the FBI and not doing the actual cop work that it requires. Because if he was doing that, we'd know about the 100 subpoenas for Joe Biden and company. But there's zero.
Yeah, one other aspect of the Trump story that everybody keeps talking about, or keeps wanting to dwell on, has to do with what the nature of these documents. We had
Mm.
leaks that they were nuclear codes, and he was going to sell them to the Saudis and everything. People forget that right after the election, there was a tiny little story of an FBI leak that said, it doesn't look like that was the case, right? There were no nuclear. The nature of the documents weren't there. But what about what we're learning about the nature of these documents that Biden had just sort of haphazardly in a box in his garage?
Well, that's the thing. It's the Trump case involves one location, and I don't know what was at that one location. The Biden case involves three locations that we know about so far, and I'm telling you, there's going to be more. So your question could not be more on point. What's in there? That's my concern. What leverage points is Vladimir Putin getting? What leverage point are the cartels getting? What do we know, or what do we, the American public, not know that Joe Biden stole and buried for himself? Is it documents that he's going to use to free his son from any criminal liability by the same Justice Department that's now investigating him? These are
Yeah.
rightful questions American citizens need to be demanding answers for. And again, the only place we're going to get it is this congressional committee, because it's not coming from the special counsel, and it certainly isn't coming from the Hoover building.
By the way, real fast, 30 seconds. One other location could be the Biden Foundation, where
Yeah.
famously they were office mates with a Chinese energy company. They literally shared the same space. That should be on lockdown, that space right now, shouldn't it, if the DOJ is doing their job?
Well, if by precedent, the FBI would have raided it already 10 times over, but it's a two-tier
Right.
system of justice. So here's what needs
Yeah.
to happen. Congress, it's a great point, subpoena the CCP associated affiliates, the banking system, because money doesn't lie, and subpoena the Biden institution at the University of Delaware for every single document from Congress. It's the only way we're going to get those answers.
Kash Patel. His book is Government Gangsters. It's out in June. Pre-order it now, governmentgangsters.com. Thanks, Kash. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.